1979, Amami Oshima Island, Japan. Lush forests stretch across this subtropical paradise. Birds call from the treetops. The undergrowth hums with life. But beneath that green serenity, something deadly slithers. The habu snake. Fast, aggressive, and venomous enough to cause agonizing tissue damage, destroying muscle, rupturing blood vessels, and in remote areas without proper treatment, sometimes death. Over 400 snake bites in a single year. Villagers were afraid to walk outside at night. Many survivors were left with permanent injuries, disfigured limbs, chronic pain, lives shattered. And in the island's most remote communities, doctors were helpless. Antivenom is protein-based. It degrades in heat. Without refrigeration, which many rural areas simply didn't have, it was useless. Japan was desperate. And then, someone had an idea. What if the solution wasn't hospitals or new medicine, but a killer? A natural predator. One that would hunt the snakes down and wipe them out. Enter the mongoose. A small, furry assassin with lightning reflexes. A reputation for slaughtering cobras and a seemingly perfect resume for the job. They released 30 mongooses onto the island. The government cheered. The people relaxed. And for a moment it looked like the nightmare was over. But what came next was a slow-motion disaster that would haunt Japan for decades. Amami Oshima is no ordinary island. It sits in the chain between mainland Japan and Okinawa, a place where species evolved in isolation for thousands of years. Endemic birds found nowhere else on Earth. Rare rodents. And the Amami rabbit, a primitive, dark-furred creature often called a living fossil, a relic from millions of years ago. A peaceful ecosystem, untouched and irreplaceable. But coexisting with that fragile paradise was the habu. The habu, Protobothrops flavoverdices, is a venomous pit viper native to these islands. Large, muscular, and ill-tempered. Think of a powerful, aggressive viper armed with a hemotoxin that destroys tissue, causes severe hemorrhaging, and can lead to organ failure. In 1980, over 400 people were bitten on this island. Some didn't survive. Many more were left permanently scarred, lost fingers, crippled hands, muscles that never healed. And everyone lived in fear. The problem wasn't just the snake. It was the island's infrastructure. Most bites happened in rural areas, places without electricity, without refrigeration. And without refrigeration, antivenom broke down in the subtropical heat before it could be used. People were suffering because help simply couldn't reach them fast enough. Building new hospitals? Too expensive. Developing a heat-stable antivenom? Too slow. So officials turned to biology. Maybe the island didn't need a doctor. Maybe it needed a predator. The mongoose seemed too perfect to fail. It had a thick coat that could resist snake strikes. It had lightning-fast reflexes. And it had a legendary reputation. Villagers in India, Nepal, and Bangladesh had watched mongooses take down cobras for centuries. They were considered heroes. Best of all, mongooses had evolved a remarkable resistance to snake venom. Their cell receptors don't bind with cobra neurotoxins the way ours do. In other words, they could survive encounters that would kill a human. But here's a detail no one seemed to consider. That famous venom resistance? It was specifically evolved against cobra neurotoxins. The habu's venom was hemotoxic, a completely different chemical weapon that attacks blood and tissue instead of the nervous system. The mongoose's legendary advantage was largely irrelevant against the very snake it was being sent to fight. And that wasn't the only red flag people ignored. Small Indian mongooses had already been introduced to islands like Hawaii, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, and Fiji. Some of those introductions dating back to the 1870s. And in every single case, it ended in ecological disaster. Native species were devastated. The target pest survived. The mongooses became the new problem. The data was there. The warnings were there. But in 1979, Japan imported 30 small Indian mongooses to Amami Oshima anyway. The idea was simple. Let them loose. Let them hunt. Let nature do the dirty work. There was even a bonus. Officials hoped the mongooses would also deal with the island's rising rat population. 2 birds, 1 mongoose. No need for chemicals. No need for traps. No need for expensive hospitals. Just one clever ecological shortcut. What could possibly go wrong? The mongooses hit the ground running. literally. They were fast, clever, and completely at home in their new environment. But months passed, and the habu snakes were still everywhere. How? Simple. The entire plan had overlooked a fatal detail. Mongooses are diurnal. They hunt during the day. Habu snakes are nocturnal. They hunt at night. The island's would-be heroes were clocking out for bed just as the real threat clocked in for the night shift. They were like two armies passing in the dark. The snakes never saw the mongooses. The mongooses never found the snakes. Even if they had met, habu snakes are no joke. They're aggressive, powerful, and armed with hemotoxic venom the mongooses had no special defense against. Why fight a deadly opponent you're not even equipped to survive when the island is crawling with easy prey? Mice, birds, rabbits, eggs, all soft, all defenseless, all delicious. And that's exactly what the mongooses did. They abandoned the habu snakes entirely and raided everything else. By 1993, alarm bells were ringing. The original 30 mongooses had multiplied. Exploded might be a better word. A single female can produce up to 14 pups a year, with no natural predators on the island and an unlimited buffet of defenseless prey. The math was catastrophic. Now there were more than 10,000 of them roaming the island. They weren't killing snakes. They were killing everything else. And Amami Oshima had no defenses. This wasn't just a case of too many animals. It was a full-blown ecological invasion. The island's most precious animals, species that had survived ice ages and volcanic eruptions, were vanishing. The Amami rabbit, that living fossil found nowhere else on Earth, was being torn apart. Millions of years of evolution, suddenly cornered by a foreign predator it had never evolved to evade. The Amami spiny rat, another island-exclusive species, was being wiped out before scientists could even study it properly. Birds stopped nesting in low branches. Their eggs were being eaten faster than they could lay them. Within 20 years, over 15 rare and endemic species were in serious danger. The island's ecosystem, thousands of years in the making, was unraveling at lightning speed. And still, the habu snakes remained. By the early 2000s, the Japanese government could no longer deny it. The mongoose experiment had been a disaster. They had solved nothing and broken everything. What followed was a 25-year hunt that would result in over 32,000 mongooses captured, one trap at a time. The Ministry of the Environment launched a full-scale eradication program. At first, it was simple, traps placed along roadsides. But the mongooses were too smart, too quick, too widespread, so the efforts escalated. Specialized bait, motion-sensing cameras, toxic lures, even search dogs trained to sniff out mongoose dens deep in the forest. But this wasn't just science. It became a community effort. In 2005, a group of volunteers formed the Amami Mongoose Busters. The name sounded like a joke. It wasn't. These were local residents, farmers, foresters, rangers, risking heat stroke, snake bites, and brutal forest terrain to trap these invaders one by one. Over time, they set up 30,000 traps across the island. And slowly, it started to work. The mongoose population began to drop, from 10,000 to 3,000 to hundreds. By 2015, something extraordinary was happening. The forests were growing quieter, but this time in a good way. Not from silence, but from balance returning. The Amami rabbits were making a comeback. The spiny rats were seen again in areas where they'd vanished. Bird songs filled the canopy as nests stayed intact for the first time in years. It had taken decades, millions of dollars, and a literal army of volunteers, but Amami Oshima was healing. And then, in April 2018, the unthinkable happened. The final mongoose was caught. No more tracks, no more sightings, no new births. The island was mongoose-free. In September 2024, Japanese officials made it official. The mongoose had been completely eradicated from Amami Oshima. And in a moment of poetic justice, the island's remarkable recovery had already been recognized on the world stage. In July 2021, Amami Oshima was inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, not in spite of its scars, but partly because of the extraordinary effort to heal them. An island that had been pushed to the edge of ecological collapse was now being celebrated as a global treasure. It was one of the largest and most successful ecological recoveries in modern history. So, was it worth it? 30 mongooses turned into over 32,000 captured across 25 years. Millions of dollars spent. Countless species nearly lost forever. An entire island ecosystem pushed to the brink. And the original snake problem? Solved. But not because of mongooses. By 2020, habu snake bites had dropped from over 400 per year to just 60. Not because the snakes disappeared, but because humans got smarter. Anti-venom became easier to store. Roads reached remote villages. Electricity and refrigeration arrived where they hadn't existed before. People learned how to avoid snakes, what hours to stay inside, what boots to wear, where not to step. Hospitals got better. Education improved. Infrastructure caught up. The answer was never a predator. It was a refrigerator. It was a reroad. It was a pamphlet teaching a farmer what to do when bitten. The mongooses did exactly what biology told them to do: survive, eat, reproduce. It's just that we didn't understand the consequences of setting that machine in motion. The story of Amami Oshima is more than a cautionary tale. It's a reminder that ecosystems are delicate, that quick fixes often create deeper wounds, that the warnings were there, from Hawaii, from Jamaica, from Fiji, and we ignored them. That when humans play God with nature, nature pushes back. And sometimes the biggest threats don't come with fangs or venom. Sometimes they come wearing fur and a clever face, and we're the ones who invited them in. What do you think of this story? Have you ever heard of another case where trying to solve one problem created an even bigger one? Let us know in the comments. And make sure to subscribe for more stories of science, survival, and the wild truths we can't afford to ignore.